Welcome to Module 1, which is focusing on the nature of science. So within this module, we have 4 mini units, each with a particular focus. This first unit, we're going to be looking at your views about the nature of science. Importantly, before we can move forward with developing your views, we really need to access what your views are to begin with. So in this module, we're going to be looking at your views about the nature of science. What is science? I mean, that's a question that you may not have asked yourself, and it's a really important question to ask yourself now at the beginning of this course. And think about why it's important to ask this question. Should you ask your students this question when you're teaching? Okay, so why are we focusing on the nature of science, and what influence does that have on our own personal views and also on the views we convey to our students? So your views about the nature of science have been formed over many years of formal schooling, and for some of you, particularly our middle-aged, I'm talking about myself there, mature-aged students, your participation in the workforce will have shaped your views as well. So, you know, those experiences you had in school can strongly influence the view of science you come out with. And we do know, particularly with our primary cohort of students, that many students have had negative experiences with science in school. They didn't like it, they found it inaccessible and too hard. And so we have to try and, reframe those views to ones that are more closely aligned with the actual scientific enterprise and not just the school science experience. We also form views about the nature of science through our life experiences and, very importantly, through our exposure to the media. The media does present a particular view of science to you and to the rest of your family and friends, and that can sometimes be a negative experience. Importantly, though, your students will also hold their own views of the nature of science, but importantly, they may not be aware of their views until they're explicitly asked to explain them. So as we know, our students have their own private theories about many concepts, and science will also be one of those concepts from their own experiences already in school, and also again through their exposure to the media. And we do know our primary students now particularly have so much more access to information. So it's important not to judge your students' views of the nature of science as either right or wrong. So at the moment you're probably thinking, well, I don't know if the views I have are right or wrong. So there's no right or wrong answers to this. There's different views about science, but we're going to explore some of the more, what we could say, more accepted views within the discipline of science. But we do know, because of our teaching and learning with constructivism, we know that those private theories that students hold, their prior views, they act as a compass to direct their learning. So we know that they're going to filter anything that we tell them or any experience they have through their own conceptual frameworks, which are very much guided and directed by their own personal theories about science. So we may want to challenge some of their views, but we need to provide them with the evidence they need to either, discard or throw away their views or alter them to be more aligned with more informed views. So here's some differing perspectives on the nature of science that people can hold, and you may hold one or more of these. Some of the more common ones that come through, particularly ones that I see in my role in pre-service science education, is, and not so much from my primary students, but more from my secondaries, this idea that science is this privileged discipline. It's the perfect one. It's superior to other ways of knowing. This one comes through, and it's very strongly shaped by school science education, particularly in year 11 and 12, and also tertiary science education can sometimes provide this view of science being perfect or privileged. I prefer this one here. Science is embedded in a social, historical, psychological context which affects all that goes on in science. And this one's a more encompassing view, which recognises that science exists within a greater or a larger context. And all of these things impact on science. Okay, science is not just an isolated endeavour. Science is a complicated affair that cannot easily be reduced to one or even a few simple descriptions. And I think that's quite accurate in that we're going to attempt to do that today, when we go through some of the aspects of the nature of science, but really it's a much more complicated endeavour. So like all school education, we're going to try and bring it back to something that makes some sort of learning accessible, but understand that by reducing it, we're sort of simplifying a rather complex endeavour. This one here, this is actually quite a common view held by the general public and often held by people that have not engaged in a lot of science education. Science is overrated. One should not give much credence to the aims, methods or results of science. This is quite interesting because the media does tend to report a particular view of science, and as you know, they do like any sort of sensationalism or negativity, they'll pounce on. So if something comes out where science looks to be implicated in a negative way, we're certainly going to hear about it. And we can explore that more when we go to later modules within the course. And a couple of other ones here. This second one, really common view of science that comes through, particularly when our students go to junior secondary. So they go for their first year of high school and they go into the lab and they start doing their cookbook style experiments where they follow their method, they get their data and they write up their reports. So it tends to give this idea that we gather data, we do some experiments, we get our evidence, we get our result. And that is an aspect of science and a very important one, but it's not the only way science is conducted. It's a much more creative endeavour than this one. And this other one, this first one here, science is primarily a rationalistic, theory-driven endeavour. And what this is about is that scientists' main job is to develop theories. That's what this view puts forward. And we're going to explore one of the major theories in science, and you would have heard of it, the theory of evolution, a bit later on in this module. So what do you think? What are your views? Have you thought about science before? Have you thought, well, what's the nature of science? If I had to explain it to someone, how would I explain this particular discipline? So what I'd like you to do is complete a short activity before going on to Unit 2. It's really important to do it now because if you do it at the end of this module, your views will be probably quite different to what they were at the beginning. So activity 1 is an open-ended questionnaire which has been internationally used in many studies to explore students' views, teachers' views, all different types of participants' views. I'd like you to just have a go at doing it now because we want to reflect back on that questionnaire at the end of Unit 4.